Hey everybody, today I'm doing something a little bit different and doing a general video about games that I can't stop playing in 2025. So for longer term viewers of the channel, you might know that I used to do a series where every couple of weeks I would recap talking about which games are hitting my table. Now unfortunately, due to some time restraints, I've not been able to continue that series, but I thought I'd do a kind of a one-stop shop version of that series in this video. So these are all relatively new games. I think most of them are 2025 releases. Some of them might have just crept in to 2024, but the most important thing is that these games are being regularly played, which is of course a huge green flag, and my desire to play them has remained strong since acquiring them and adding them to my collection. But before I get started and talking through these games pretty informally, I want to give a shout out to the show's sponsor, kienda.co.uk, who are my go-to online retailer, and if you use the link in the show notes or the QR code, then you can get 5% off your first order. Let's start with the first game, and this is one that I've not actually covered on the channel yet, so you're getting a bit of a sneak peek in terms of a review. This is a Nishi, or Nishi, I'm not quite sure how you pronounce this one. This is a brand new one from Renegade. It's a very subtle kind of a tableau builder where you and your opponent, it's only a two-player game, are trying to build the best 5x2 or 2x5 a grid of cards, and you do that through this very meticulous process of not only managing your 5 cards on display, but also the 5 cards in your hand. So it has this quite unique twist on it where you are not only managing, again, those 5 cards, but you have to be careful about how you manage the cards in your hand, and you cannot reorganize them, at least free will. You have to spend actions to reorganize them. So think of like something like Scout. This one has an element of that in terms of being restricted on the maneuverability of those cards. But what you're essentially doing is you're pulling cards from the center and exchanging or discarding cards from your hand or your side of the table, trying to orientate these cards into different formations because different cards combo with other cards based on adjacencies and stuff like that. So, you know, for example, you've got the rice fields. If you string up several of those orthogonally to each other, you'll score more and more points. Some of them will score based on the position in your hand, and so on. You know, for example, the fortifications want to be on the extremities of each row. So again, very subtle, maybe a little bit cerebral at times because you do have to think 1 or 2 moves ahead because you don't have instant access to move and chop and change things as you would like. But I like that, and it has this kind of elegant, kind of oriental feel to it. And I think this one could be a bit of a slow burner. I've not heard anyone talk about this one yet. That is Nishi. That is a really pleasant game and a pleasant surprise. One that I have talked a bit more about on the channel, which, to be honest, I'm probably wasting my breath because it's going to be so popular. Fliptoons. This is kind of my favorite kind of deck building style game, and you know, people might take offense to that because it's not exactly deck building, but you are constructing a deck of cards that does improve as the game goes on, but you're not kind of choosing actions with those cards and then skimming cards off your next off the top of your deck and discarding the previous ones. This one, every round you are shuffling your whole deck of cards and kind of blind revealing them, again building a little tableau of cards, and again they will combo with each other based on what's previously been drawn or stacking on top of each other or other cards that appear, and you're trying to race to get to a certain amount of points. And then you'll do one final round, and if you win that final round, then you will be the winner. It's super pleasant to play. It only takes around 15 minutes, and it has a great game arc to it where you start off not being able to do much, but in just a few rounds you can massively amplify your points. I love the market system where the best cards will always be the most expensive, but sometimes if there are no cheap cards, you can get the good cards for very cheap. So think of something like Power Grid. Wonderful visual appeal, and this one is just firing on all cylinders, and I can't really see why anyone would enjoy this one unless you are completely against a random aspect. But this one for me is going to be an evergreen. It's going to be a blockbuster because it is so widely appealing and downright fun. On to the next small card game. This is much more of a thinky game. This is the Jewel Ficardia. As you can see, a very small box here. Another 2-player only game, and that is going to be a feature with some of these others that I've spoken about too, because I do play a lot of 2-player games. This one is definitely the best example of a kind of a simultaneous card reveal game that I've ever played, and that's generally a mechanism I enjoy. I've played a lot of them, and in this one, you and your opponent are trying to win essentially 5 duels and collect these signet rings by having the highest influence in that particular battle. But when you choose your card and you reveal them simultaneously with your opponent, the higher card or the higher numbered card will get the signet ring, but the lower valued card will trigger their power. And that is where the gameplay lies in this one, because the synergies with these lower valued cards are fantastic. And you can come up with some really creative tactical moves and strategies that are just quite fascinating when it is such a small amount of components in such a small box. So, for example, one of the cards might say, well, if you are the lowest card with this one, you win instantly, but it's a higher value card. So you might want to play another card before it that will lower the value of your next card, which will be that final card, and try to sneak you in that way. So there's kind of, it's kind of, again, that gives you a sense of paranoia because there are so many ways you can lose, and it's also a game that you don't always want to win the round because again, triggering those powers is so beneficial. Wonderfully streamlined, just like fine-tuned to the nth degree, and I love that when games are so succinct and well ironed out. And I love the fact this also comes with 2 sets of cards for replayability, where you can play with set 1, set 2, or even mix them. So tons of game to explore here in such a small box, and one of the best 2-player games that I've played in some time. Next up, we have a couple of card shedding games. This one, Ruins. This one is actually by John Declare, who is known for this kind of card sleeving mechanism where your cards are sleeved, and as the game progresses, you slip these kind of acetate sheets into it to improve the stats of that card. And for a kind of more traditional card shedding game, that's quite unusual. So as you could probably expect, mechanisms wise, this is so simple. You're just trying to build sets of the same number. You don't even have to do runs or anything in this game. But as I said, if you invest your currency, you can buy these sheets and boost the cards, which might say, well, this counts as 2 of that number, or this is now a wild number, and so on. So it's all about trying to stay in the round and bleed your cards as quickly as possible to get the most points. But at the same time, you have to be careful, because if you invest heavily in a card, you actually have to shuffle those cards with the remaining ones for the next round, and your opponent could get the cards that you spent so much on. And there are a few little insurance policies to get rid of that, or to get around that, and to bank the cards for yourself, but you do have to use them very carefully. Super fun, and amazing level of production as well for such a small box. And for a game genre that is so saturated, this is a really nice twist on the card shedding mechanism. And the same applies to the next one, which is Panda Spin, which again, same concept, but in this one you are building runs and stuff as well. But in this one, all the cards are double-sided. So you have one side face up, and you have also an approved side, which is going to be kind of face down as you play it. And basically, whenever you lose a round, you will pick your cards back up and flip them to the most powerful side, which again will mean that this card now counts as several numbers, or again, wilds, or that will give you passive points, and so on. So another game where sometimes you might want to deliberately lose the round so that you can boost your stats and have a really powerful next round, but at the same time you are under constant threat that you want to get rid of your cards quickly, because the bigger the gap between you and your opponent in terms of how many cards you have, means the more points are going to go to the victor. So again, it's all about pacing yourself just carefully. And I love those games that walk that tightrope of, yeah, I want to be a little bit patient and not rush, but I also don't want to drag my heels because I'm going to get caught off guard and be shortchanged. Also lovely, lovely artwork with Panda Spin. Probably the biggest box game here I got, and another game I've been speaking highly about, Citizens of the Spark. So this for me has been one of the gangbuster blockbuster hits of the year for me. This is like almost tailor-made for my tastes. Now it's basically a card drafting game, and then you're triggering a certain character that you have drafted, and these characters do tons of different things, and there's tons of variety in the box. Now, depending on the player count, you play with like 8 to 10 different sets, and there are like 30 different sets in the box. So they all interact with each other in different ways. Admittedly, some do interact better than others, but it's all about trying to exploit those combos and exploit those cards to get the most points. Lots of very subtle mechanisms that I like too. Like, for example, it has that Puerto Rico aspect where when you trigger your card in player order, if your opponent has a that same character, they can also trigger their card. And the more duplicates of the same card you have, the more powerful those abilities are. So you've got to be very careful about when to trigger these characters so that your opponents don't get a net gain on you. And at the same time, neglected cards will build up kind of passive currency, so that there's always that kind of auto-balancing catch-up mechanism going on at the same time. And it's a game that I don't really care that some of the cards don't gel perfectly well. And now there are predetermined sets in the game that work brilliantly, but sometimes I just want to pick out 9 or 10 random ones, play with those, and just see how they mesh together. So brilliant game for like 30 to 45 minutes. Again, tons of variety. You'll never play the same game twice. That is Citizens of the Spark. Spoiler alert, it's probably going to be a top 3 game of the year for me. It is that good. Next up, something completely different. Now, this is actually by Rainer Knizia, who, again, long-term viewers of the channel might know that he's probably, top 3 designer for me. Now, this is actually, I think it's a remaking of an older Knizia game. I can't remember what it was called, but this is Icor. Now, Icor is more of a traditional, again, 2-player only abstract strategy game. Very chess-like in its feel, as you're moving pieces around the board. In this one, you're trying to shed your little player tokens before your opponent does by moving orthogonally around the board. For every space you skip over, you'll drop one of your pieces, and if you kind of drive over your opponent's pieces, then you'll pick them up and remove them from the board, which of course hurts your opponent's efforts. But the twist on this game is that all of your pieces has a unique power, and they'll do crazy things. Like, for example, some might say, well, you can jump over your opponent's piece, or this one laps around the board, or this one can go diagonal, or this one removes all the pieces around it. But you can only use those powers once per game per character. So it's all, again, about trying to trigger those powers at the right time, and almost sometimes using them as leverage, as a kind of a Cold War style threat, rather than just going gangbusters and gung-ho and just using all the power straight away. So again, very meticulous. The game actually is lightning fast in my experience. I've played this a lot, and my games rarely go beyond like 10-15 minutes, and the box says 40 minutes, so maybe we're terrible at this. But I always enjoy it, and to be honest, this has been a slow burner for me as well, because I started it, I liked it, I didn't love it, but the more I play it, the more I'm starting to love it. So that's always a good sign. So again, probably not your taste if you are not into abstract strategy games, because it is quite rigid, but the stakes are quite low because it is breezy at the same time and pretty fast. So that is Icor. Next up, we have another 2-player only game with Toy Battle. This is actually an unusual one because it's not normally the kind of game I'd go for, but there's something about this game that has a degree of magic to it. So it's I suppose you can call it like a lane battler, area control style game, where you and your opponent are trying to reach each other's base by placing one of your player pieces on their base, or you can try and surround certain regions to collect the stars there, and if you do collect enough stars, then you'll instantly win. So it has kind of 2 sudden death mechanisms going on at the same time. Like, rules-wise, this is as easy as it gets. All you're doing is you're either drawing tiles and adding them to your rack, or you are deploying a new piece onto the board. And these pieces are all numbered, coming in different strengths, which, the higher the strength means that you can beat your opponent, but they all have their own abilities too. So for example, you have like a wild piece that can beat anything, but it's very weak to be attacked back. You've got these monkey pieces that can teleport anywhere. You've got these like robots that can attack your player's rack of tiles and slow them down. And it really is a game about, again, pacing yourself, because you always want to have options in your rack, because if you don't, then you're going to have to spend time to draw tiles back up, which means that your opponent will kind of capitalize on that on the board presence. So again, you have to be prepared to spin plates, maybe give up a bit of ground here so you can gain it here. And it kind of feels a little bit stalematy at times, but just because of the way the game's designed, it will always work out. And much like Icor, this game does a great job of softening the blows in terms of a head-to-head style game. It's actually very fluffy and breezy, despite being competitive at the same time. So it does a great degree of making the stakes feel low, and not only because of the art style and the theme and how fast it is, But it's still not a throwaway game either, so it does really walk that tightrope well, in my opinion, and which means it will hit the table more because it means that it's not so mood dependent to play it, and that's what I like about Toy Battle. It's been very regularly in my games bag. Now, another 2-player only game, although you can play it at 4, I wouldn't recommend that, but this is Zenith. So Zenith, probably a step above a game like Toy Battle or even Icor. This is a multi-lane tug-of-war style game where you are trying to collect, I think it's 5 different planets, 3 of the same type, or I don't know, some variety of that. But what I love about this game more than anything is the card play. So it has that great tableau mechanism where if you play the same type of card again and again, it gets cheaper with each one you play. So think of something like, Hadara or, St. Petersburg. This game does that, which I love. But what I love about this game more than anything is those player powers. So they're all really fun to play with. They're like extremely dynamic and it feels like everything's worth going for. And that's what I love about games like this, is where, all the powers on the cards aren't subtle and they aren't boring and they all feel great. And, of course, that means your opponent can hit you harder than you'd like them to. But it means you always have that kind of trick up your sleeve to hit them back just as hard. Different routes you can go for as well, as you can climb these tracks and get these bonuses. And it is a real game about spinning multiple plates, because if you're falling behind here, you might be pushing here, but you might not care too much about this coloured planet. So you might let that one go. Comboing these cards together, it's just an absolute joy to play. And again, it's just satisfying as you build more and more cards out there. The game arc gets better and better as you're affording stronger and stronger cards with more devastating abilities on them. So massive, massive hit for me. That is Zenith. Apologies for the siren outside. And the final game I'm going to talk about is, again, I think this is from this year, Misos. Another card game. So as you can see, I'm playing a lot of card games this year. Now, this one is much more punishing than the other games that I've played. Not in terms so much of take that, but more that the game is quite restrictive. So it's another kind of tableau building style game as you're collecting cards or drafting them. And all of these cards have different abilities or different uses. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to, of course, get the most points by the end of the game, but you're also trying to overcome these threats that the game will throw at you. So for example, every phase in the game, there'll be a feeding phase where you need to play a food for each of your cards that you have. And if you don't, you'll lose points. Or there's majority bonuses if you have the most of this card at certain times. Or if you have this card, or the most of this card, you'll get more points and so on. So you're fighting on multiple fronts here. But I love the drafting system in this game, which is very synonymous with games like Floriferous, where if you want the best options, then you will go last in player order and you'll also go last next turn. So sometimes you are willing to take a less than optimal option so that you can secure yourself, maybe first place next round. And also, if you keep going last, you're bleeding food, because if you are last back to base, then you will lose food as well. But the cards you're collecting are basically simple set collection. There's ones that will lessen the amount of food that you need to pay. Again, there's ones where you want to have the majority of them. There's unique buildings you can buy to give you unique powers and endgame scoring. And it's all about trying to squeeze the blood out of squeezing blood out of the stone when it comes to scoring points in this game, because it can be, again, pretty, not demoralizing, but sometimes you need to wait until your card engine starts working for you and starts paying off. But really like this one. It's been, again, a huge pleasant surprise to me, and I don't really hear too many people talking about this one, and I think it should be, because it is a quality design. So that's it, really. That's the 10 games I wanted to talk about, and hopefully something on here has piqued your interest. I'm sure some of these games will appear again on the channel when it comes to top 10 games of the year. But I thought now was a good chance to talk about these games before that big Essen rush comes out and all the new releases I talked about. These games are, towards the tail end of 2024 into 2025, and they're all fantastic. So really looking forward to see what else the board game year has to offer. So hopefully you've enjoyed the video. If you have, please be sure to hit like and subscribe to the channel. But for everybody else, I'll see you next time on Chairman of the Board. Bye bye.